Greetings. Welcome to the Understanding Plato podcast. I'm Lawrence Holgate, author of the book Understanding Plato, The Smart Student's Guide to the Socratic Dialogues and the Republic. This episode is a continuation of our reading of chapter 10 of the book, and that chapter is titled Sun, Line, and Cave, by the way. We're at section 10.5 that has the title The Allegory of the Cave. The allegory is probably the most famous thought experiments created by Plato and one of the most famous thought experiments in the history of philosophy. He produces a kind of visual imagery in the allegory, in his description of the cave, and it reinforces the message that he's already given us about the education of the rulers and the role in that education of what he calls the form of the good. Socrates asks Glaucon in describing the allegory to imagine prisoners living in an underground cave-like dwelling with an entrance a long way up, which is both open to the light and as wide as the cave itself. They've been there since childhood, fixed in the same place, with their necks and legs fettered, able to see only in front of them, because their bonds prevent them from turning their heads around. They stare at a cave wall on which are projected images, and the images are cast from carved figures, we call them puppets, illuminated by a fire and carried by people on a parapet above and behind the prisoners, so that the prisoners see nothing of themselves or one another. They only see the shadows that the fire casts on the wall in front of them. And if one of the prisoners is released from his chains, and he's suddenly compelled to stand up, turn his head, walk, and look up toward the light, he would first see the puppets, if he turns around, and then he would see the fire. And then if he's dragged away from there by force, up the rough, steep path, and out of the cave and into the sunlight, he would need time to get adjusted. Plato writes, "At first he'd see shadows most easily, then images of men and other things in water, and then the things themselves. Finally, he'd be able to see the sun, not images of the sun in water or some alien place, but the sun itself in its own place, and he'd be able to study it." That's at paragraph 516 of Republic. Socrates completes the analogy by showing Glaucon the connection between the cave and what we will shortly talk about, the divided line. He says this, that the visible realm should be likened to the prison dwelling, and the light of the fire inside it will be likened to the power of the sun. And if you interpret the upward journey and the study of things above as the upward journey of the soul to the intelligible realm, you'll grasp what I hope to convey. In the knowable realm, the form of the good is the last thing to be seen, and it is reached only with difficulty. Once one has seen it, however, one must conclude that it is the cause of all that is correct and beautiful in anything, that it produces both light and its source in the visible realm, and that in the intelligible realm it controls and provides truth and understanding, so that anyone who is to act sensibly in private and public must see it. And then he gives a drawing in the book that shows the imagery of the allegory of the cave and how it fits with the various stations on the divided line. And of course, I can't say anything more about this except that it is truly a divided line. When you look at the Republic itself, you'll see the sketch of it on one of the pages. And on the top of the line, you'll see the words intelligible and visible. The intelligible things are the forms and hypotheses, and the visible things What you see in the real world are the originals and the images. So, for example, in the intelligible world, you would see the form of the mathematical forms, for example. Take the form of a square or the form of any other shape, like a triangle. And then in the intelligible realm, there would be hypotheses that one would make in doing math about the properties of the square or of the triangle. In the visible realm, however, you would see actual things that are triangular in shape. You would see things that are actually square in shape. And you'd see images of things, perhaps images of them in the water, of these things. Now compare that to the cave. What is it that these people who are trussed up in the cave and who can only see the cave wall and the shadows on the cave wall, what do they see? Well, inside the cave, they see shadows on the wall. As they go out of the cave, as they're dragged out, as Plato puts it, they would see the puppets and the firelight. And then outside the cave, once they get outside the cave, they see real world objects, real things, no longer just images of things, no longer puppets. And then finally they would see the sun. Now, thought experiments are often helpful, but they can also lead to confusion. In the diagram of the divided line, there's no mention of the form of the good. But in the superimposed cave diagram, its analog, the sun, figures prominently, making the real world objects visible, leading us to the conclusion that the forms on the divided line must have a similar role with respect to hypotheses. But this leads us to wonder why the form of the good has a special role in this process. Maybe we'll find out. Finally, in the cave, firelight has the function of causing the shadows of the puppets to display on the wall in front of the prisoners. But there's nothing analogous to firelight on the divided line of which we can say that it is the cause of the images, of the originals we create when we remember, imagine, or dream. But remember now, this is an allegory, and trying to think about it as an allegory and then trying to think about his divided line and how these two go together raises a lot of issues. But it is interesting, isn't it, that he gives us a description of the sun and how the sun casts light on things in the real world, making them visible to us. And then he shifts to our thinking prowess, our ability to think. And when we think about things, we think about the forms of these things, like triangularity, like being a square, like the good, like the beautiful, as concepts. And we create hypotheses about these things. And these things actually interact with, in some way that we don't know, with the originals. The statue of David is a beautiful statue. Beautiful because what? The form of beauty is to be seen in the statue itself, or at least so we think. Now, the study of the form of the good is the final step in the education of the guardian rulers of the Republic. When writing about the unholy deeds committed by politicians in Athens during his lifetime, Plato became convinced that a study of the true philosophy will enable us to discern what is just for a city or an individual in every case. And the human race will have no respite from evils until those who are really and truly philosophers acquire political power, or until, through some divine dispensation, those who rule and have political authority in cities become real philosophers. This is Plato speaking now, not in the Republic, but in the 7th letter at paragraph 326b. Plato's 7th letter, an entirely separate publication, paragraph 326b. Now, to this end, the end that he's just discussed, Plato maintains in Republic that it is coming to know the good itself, the form good that constitutes the crucial final step of the long education of the philosopher kings. So our final question for Plato is how a study of the form, called the form of the good, will provide the rulers of the ideal state with the knowledge that they require to legislate just laws and to judge and execute those laws in a just way. But unfortunately, this question is never answered. All we know at this point in the dialogue is the hypothetical claim, quote, if a form is correctly called good, then it is so because it participates in the form of the good. Well, we've learned that much. If a form is correctly called good, then it is so because it participates in the form of the good. We also know that a form is correctly called good because it has ideal attributes. Using justice as our example, this means that the form justice, as compared to particular just actions in the sensible world, is perfect. That form, the form justice, is just in all respects. It is always just. It is just no matter compared to what. And it is just to all who apprehend it, no matter from where. Whereas a just action in the sensible world is not just in all respects. It is not always just, and so on. But this is true of all forms, moral as well as mathematical. All of these forms, including, for example, the form circle, the form beauty, they are perfect in the same way that the form justice is perfect. That is, all the things that we just said, that the form is just in all respects, that the form is circular. So we can say that about the form circle. So we can say of the form circle that that form is circular in all respects, that it is always circular. It is circular no matter compared to what, and it is circular to all who apprehend it, no matter from where. Whereas a actual circle drawn on a chalkboard, let's say, or on a piece of paper in the sensible world is not circular in all respects. There's some chalk in it. There's a color in it, for example. It is not always circular. You can certainly rub it off the chalkboard, and so on. So here's the question. Does this knowledge, for example, that the form justice is good, does that help the ideal guardian in his or her task of ruling in the ideal city? Until the rulers know what it is that makes the form justice good, apart from the fact that it, like all other forms, is perfect, they will be unable to formulate and command just laws. The ruler will not even know whether kingship or aristocracy is preferred to democracy, to oligarchy, or a democracy, nor will the ruler know whether tasks in the city should be divided on the basis of natural abilities or on the basis of individual choice. That leaves us in a sort of dilemma, doesn't it? Because until the rulers know what it is that makes the form justice good, apart from the fact that it, like all other forms, is perfect, they're not going to be able to formulate and be able to command just laws, or at least that's the point that Plato is trying to drive home. But we need more detail, don't we? And that's, I think, what Plato exactly wants us to do. He wants us to carry this out. He wants us to think critically about these concepts so we can decide on ourselves whether, let's say, aristocracy or kingship is a better political form than the form of democracy that we embrace in the Western world in the 21st century. Well, that's all for now. That concludes Chapter 10 of Understanding Plato, and we will be continuing in the next episode In Chapter 11, we'll be talking about defective constitutions and damaged souls. That would be books 8 and 9 of Plato's Republic. Good evening. Thanks for listening.